Welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Connor Judge and I'm a manager of cities with the Tamarack Institute. I am really excited for this one. Today we will be discussing community leaders. And so today's topic is community leaders, a necessary part of your social change strategy. Before we kind of dive into this webinar, I do want to do a land acknowledgement. And so we begin this webinar by acknowledging that we are meeting on Indigenous land. And as settlers, this recognition of the contributions and historic importance of Indigenous peoples must be clearly and overtly connected to our collective commitment to make the promise and the challenge of truth and reconciliation real within our communities. And so I'm joining from Tekaronto, which is derived from the Mohawk expression, trees standing in water. These lands are colonially known as Toronto. This land is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. I'd also like to acknowledge that Toronto is home to many Indigenous peoples from across Turtle Island and as well the globe. And by acknowledging these lands and their original stewards, I'm trying to position myself, a white settler, within the social, historical, and political contexts embedded within the lands known as Canada, but as well, I'm commemorating Indigenous peoples' principal kinship to these lands. So today's speakers, so just for the sake of time, we won't be reading through biographies, but I encourage everyone, please go to our landing page where the webinar, where you registered, and you can read their full bios. But I just want to say it is a privilege to facilitate this fire chat with these inspiring women. For today's conversation, we have 4 community leaders from 3 different provinces, and we also have the rural and the urban context captured as well within these panelists. While these communities are in different parts of the country, there are 2 things that tie them together. The first is that they're all part of our deepening community movement as members, which there is more information in the chat for those interested. And the second is their passion for community. Which in the communities which they live in. And I know that this is going to come out in the call because it has come out in the conversations I've had with our wonderful panelists so far. And so Ksenia, Dianne, Kim, and Natalie, welcome to today's webinar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Connor.
So I say we just dive right in. Let's just go right to that first question. And what I want to do is I'm going to start with Kim. And then Kim, could you just please tell us a little bit about your community and the organization you're a part of?
Certainly. Dianne and I live in the Battlefords, which is in Northwest Saskatchewan in Canada. We are a Treaty 6 territory, homeland of the Cree and Saulteaux, and as well traditional homeland of the Métis. We are along the Yellowhead Highway in Canada, if you're familiar with that, and our communities, North Battleford and Battleford, are on opposite sides of the North Saskatchewan River. So a river and a river valley runs between our community. And we call ourselves cities, but our city here has about 16 to 18,000 people, and the town of Battleford has about 4,000 people. So just close to 20,000 people in what we consider the urban area. And then we are surrounded by rural areas, which were traditionally part of the homestead, part of colonialism. And we are blessed to have 9 First Nation communities around our area as well. And we're surrounded by lakes, rolling hills, the traditional prairies that you see in pictures, and just a lot of history for Canada here, as Battleford was the original capital of the Northwest Territories, which was Western Canada into Ontario as well.
Thanks, Kim. Dianne, let's go to you next, as you're part of the Battlefords Community Project.
Okay, I think just following up on what Kim said, certainly the city of North Battleford is the central hub of services for that surrounding rural area, and many people come and go, so they may live in the city and move back to their home territory, which creates a very unique perspective on community, I think. And one of the things our project has attempted to do is really try and bring these groups of people together to be just a better community for everybody. So, you know, we're trying to develop, I think, a sense of community for everyone, and that differs a little bit depending on if you live in the core of North Battleford or the RM of Battle River, or perhaps the First Nation of Poundmaker. So any specific questions on that, Connor?
No, I think that's great, Dianne. I think that's a great introduction, and I'm sure in the later questions we'll dive in.
Sure.
Ksenia, we'll go to you next.
Yes, about our community. Well, hello, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here. And we're going to West Coast of Canada in urban context. And here representing Kitsilano neighborhood, located on unceded, stolen, traditional ancestral lands of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, colonially known as Vancouver. And Kitsilano neighborhood, I might be a bit biased, but is one of the most beautiful neighborhoods in Vancouver. It is surrounded by beaches. There are lots of parks, greenery, community gardens, and all of this at the backdrop of the North Shore Mountains. And it's a residential neighborhood with a mix of commercial areas as well. And our community has a legacy of collective community action. As early, I believe, 1907, community was coming together to lobby to the government to bring infrastructure and tram service to Kitsilano. In 1960s, Kitsilano was known as the hippie hangout ground, and the culture that came with that. And to this day, the neighborhood is rich with community initiatives, community gardens, and block parties and projects. So this community spirit lives here. Another fun fact, Greenpeace was actually started in Kitsilano. And right now, David Suzuki Foundation continues the environmental movement. And final fact I'll share is the Ryan Reynolds, our Canadian treasure, actually comes from Kitsilano. So this is us, Kitsilano neighborhood.
Thanks, Ksenia. And then Natalie.
Hi. Yeah, so I'm from Wetaskiwin, Alberta, kind of, I guess, sandwiched between the two here. We are a small city, about 45 minutes south of Edmonton. Only about 12,500 people in the actual city itself. About double that if you include the county, which I believe is the biggest county in Alberta, and the Indigenous bands. There's 4 nations to the south of us. The name comes from the Cree Wetaskiwin Spatnau, which means, and I love this, it means the place where we have learned to live on the land together. And it actually comes from a really wonderful story of an accidental peace treaty between the Blackfoot and the Cree that happened in the hills around this area. And so, but I think it's really relevant to what we're trying to do with the organization here. So we're one of the oldest cities in Alberta. We have a really compelling history between the rich Indigenous culture in the area and then our really prevalent settler agricultural story that we live in right now. So yeah, that's Wetaskiwin. Are we talking about our organizations too? I forgot.
That's going to be the next question. So yeah, if you want to keep going,
I'm
Natalie.
done. Are you sure?
Yeah, keep going.
Okay, awesome. So I'm a part of a small group called Connect Wetaskiwin. And initially we were part of our group was part of a city guided initiative to address the houselessness issue that we have in our city. And so when that committee came to a close, as a group, we were offered the opportunity to get some asset-based community-led development training. And there was about 60 people in the group and only 5 of us signed up. And we had no idea what it was. And so we were really surprised at the first meeting to find an opportunity to help ease some of the tension that we have in our community just through the rebuilding of relationships. We have a lot of really wonderful, generous people here. We are on average below lower income for the province, but consistently we're in the top 5 most giving communities in Alberta, which I think says a lot about the kind of people who live here. But in general, there's a sense of apathy about our city. People kind of look down on it and don't want to be a part of it. Our young people are leaving, our population and our infrastructure is aging. So our taxes are going up and we're losing services and people are frustrated. But Connect Wetaskiwin really hopes to bring people together in positive ways to find creative solutions for all those issues.
Thanks, Natalie. Let's just go let's go back the same order we went. And so Ksenia, I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit about Good Neighbor Kitsilano.
Absolutely. Good Neighbor Kitsilano. It's a grassroots initiative, as grassroots as it gets. It really started with me having idea that we need to come together with our neighbors. So it started as a block connector program where the idea is to strengthen the connections among neighbors, whether it's within an apartment building or city block, because we know neighborly connections are crucial. We know that your first responders are not first responders, they're your neighbors. So everything that we went through COVID really showcased the importance of those connections to people who live next door. And from that, we developed a community action network, or Kitsilano CAN. I really like that acronym because it really speaks to the idea and the spirit of our group, that it is action by community for community to improve the place we call home. And today I see a few of our members in the audience. Hello, Kitsilano CAN. Nice to see you and thanks for joining. We are a diverse group of about 30 neighbors now, diverse ages, experiences, cultural backgrounds, abilities, and we come together with a question: what can we do with what we have as neighbors, as community, to improve the place we call home? And people come with their own passions and things that they care about in the neighborhood. And we form care pods around the areas of care. So right now we have social connections as one of the focus, mental health, emergency preparedness, and food security. So for the next year, we'll be piloting projects to make a difference in those areas. So, and once again, it's with what we have, within community. So we're not going to the government just yet, but we're doing the work for grassroots on the ground. And once we've done that, then we'll be ready to go to the government, to the municipality and say, this is what our vision for our community is, and meet us in the middle. So this is us, Good Neighbor Kitsilano.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ksenia. And then Dianne, I was wondering if maybe you want to tell us a little bit about the Battlefords Community Project.
Actually, I'm going to let Kim address that as the person who's kind of been most involved in this from the beginning, and then maybe I can just add some perspective after her.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Dianne. We started as part of the Battlefords Community Initiative with funding from W. Brett Wilson, who is from our town. And he has been very passionate about the community and funding resources to improve the community, and both in big ways and small ways, like purchasing playgrounds for schools or funding kids to go to sports, but also bigger things like the first time ever in the history of our two communities, he helped and funded the process to develop a regional agreement between the two municipal governments and the local First Nation communities. So he's been a huge part of helping to move the Battlefords forward. And so similar to Natalie's story, they did an asset-based interview with some of us who are involved in the community, and then they asked us to come to a meeting about improving the community, and we started from there. If you Google North Battleford, I love it here, and it's a beautiful place to live. We have so many assets, but if you Google North Battleford, almost every story is about us being called Crime Town. I think W5 or no, one of the show anyways came here and did a whole episode on North Battleford as Crime Town. And there are, of course, some safety concerns, and we've got different issues that someone else mentioned, some people who have trouble with finding a home. And like Dianne said, people come and go through. It's very lots of people who travel through here. But there are so many assets as well. And interestingly, when they were here filming that show, they made set up a fake stabbing in a back alley right across the street from where we were having a giant community barbecue sponsored by one of our First Nation health centers with hundreds of people, young musicians, a huge diverse population enjoying pancakes. But they didn't do any interviews about that or anything in the show about that. So we've been really trying to a lot of people started on trying to make it a safer community, but we've broadened that to wanting to live in a community that values diversity, respects and promotes healing and growth for everyone, so everyone can feel like they belong. So we want to use this Tamarack approach to really create a movement that helps bridge some of the gaps that we have in our community.
Thank you, Kim. Dianne, do you have anything to add?
Not a lot. I think we do have 3 distinct populations that we're attempting to bring together. Obviously, those of us that are descendants from the settler population, the many neighbors who are from our First Nations, whether they live on the First Nation or live in the urban area, as well as many newcomers. You know, we've certainly had many people come from other countries, and I think our approach is to try and bring all 3 of those groups together in a way that is more neighborly than some of what we're feeling now.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for the overview of the great work that you're doing in your communities. And I love how asset-based community development has already come up just right at the beginning, because, you know, what was really striking to me is that while we're all doing pretty similar grassroots work of trying to build connection and a sense of belonging, we're all very 3 different communities, as you can tell from the stories. And it really makes me think of a quote from the founder of ABCD, John McKnight, who says, "Once you've been to one community, you've only been to one community." And I think the stories that I've told today beautifully speak the truth to that quote. So that's kind of an overview about you know, the community organizations and the communities that are on the call right now. Now I really want to focus on community leadership and what does it mean? And so I'm just going to jumble the order. Let's keep it fun. Ksenia, I'm curious, what does community leadership mean to you?
Absolutely. And it's such a good question, because I feel to me, community leadership, it's truly taking action and making things happen, and whatever shape or form that may take, truly leaning into one's assets and gifts and using those gifts to contribute, whether it's to reach out to your neighbor or organize a special interest group, crochet or gardening, or bring together the whole community to make change on a particular issue. And again, learning from asset-based community development and John McKnight, this shift from consumer mindset to citizen mindset, I think is at the core of what leadership, community leadership means to me, because for so long we've been conditioned that you know, the governments or institutions will come and solve all of the issues for us, and the transaction nature of that relationship really, as we have seen, doesn't serve us that well. But people are in communities have felt that, well, we don't have power. Everything is decided for us. You know, democracy is not working so well. But I think it is time for us to prove otherwise. And this is what we are doing with Good Neighbor Kitsilano, little steps. And it takes time, I would say, to really build that citizen muscle and exercise that power, because when we come together, that's when we realize that we do have that power, and amazing things can happen. So I would say the shift from consumer to citizen mindset and taking action, however that action may look like.
I agree, Ksenia. I do believe that there is strength in numbers, and I think building those connections between people really speaks to that. Natalie, what does community leadership mean to you?
So when I was thinking about this question, I I think for me, well, everything Ksenia said was amazing. And just to add on to that, like doing so, like caring for your community from a place of positivity, which was really something in our community that was not existing so much. Like we had a lot of, rant and rave tirades, and similar to what Kim was saying about the Battlefords, we too have ranked quite highly on the crime list for both Canada and Alberta at some points. So trying to focus on the positive and then taking it a step further to I believe community leadership, those people are creating safe spaces and they're making opportunities to hear from different perspectives and allow for different perspectives to be shared and discussed. And then encouraging and supporting community diversity and in order to build on what is good that already exists, like Ksenia was saying too, like using from within the community, but building off the good, because that's what's working now, and knowing what the good is. I think it takes a community leader to be able to see those things, and then acknowledging the importance of collaborating as a community to address the missing pieces, because I think that kind of organically flows out of a group who's thinking positively about their community.
Natalie, what you just said makes me think of another quote from another prominent ABCD thought leader, Cormac Russell, who says all the time, focus on what's strong, not what's wrong. And I think that's such an important mindset to have, especially when we're working at that community level. Kim, I'm curious, what does community leadership mean to you?
Yeah, it's very similar to Natalie's answer, so I look forward to connecting with Wetaskiwin.
Me too.
I kind of consider myself an accidental leader. I don't know, my brothers would say that's because I'm a bossy big sister probably, but for me it is about caring for my community and all the people there, and that's just what it comes from for me. I've always wanted to build a better community and engage in continuous learning, just help people's lives be better. But I think to become a leader from that is to remain optimistic and hopeful, not falsely so, but to spot what's going right, to catch people doing something right. And I like to just connect with people in a way that they feel seen, and to appreciate them and look for what's unique about each person so that they can tap into that sense of hope for themselves. Because after a lot of things that have happened in this community and intergenerational traumas, there are reasons that people are feeling negative, and it is sometimes feels hopeless. So rather than just being like, oh, there's nothing we can do, I think, like Ksenia said, being like, well, look what's working, look what we have done, how can we build from there? And we are serious about your situation. We are serious about these problems, and we think there are ways to solve it, so we're going to try. And I think for me, the biggest thing is to be willing to step out like that and face the naysayers in a positive way, and to take the chances to try something that might not work, but to understand that's about learning, and to show more people that it's okay to do that. It's okay for us to speak out and to say we love our community, even if it's not perfect, and to recognize that those parts that aren't are things we can keep building on. So I guess for me, changing from accidental to trying more consciously to be a leader is just to take the risk to step out and say those things to more people and in a broader way.
Kim, thank you for that. There was the one word comes to my mind, and it's being brave. I think, you have to be brave to step out there, put yourself out there, not be afraid to maybe make yourself look like a fool, or to say the wrong thing, because you can always, if you say the wrong thing, apologize and move forward. But thank you for that. And then Dianne, what does community leadership mean to you?
Well, just on that note, Connor, one of the things that I keep reminding myself in my involvement in this project is I have nothing to lose and I have everything to gain. So, putting myself out there, sometimes looking like a fool or not knowing what I'm doing, I don't lose much by that, but I can really gain a lot from it. And when I think about what community leadership means to me, it's really about action, not appointment. So, we have lots of appointed leaders, but unless they're actually doing some positive action, leadership is questionable. And I think to be an effective community leader, you really need to be respected and trusted by your community. And, I think there's some specific challenges in that for us here in the Battlefords, given our particular history around colonialism and race relations, which isn't a term I particularly like, but our community relations might be a better way to put that. But I think community leadership also means stepping up, right? Being the person that says, maybe I can do something that could be positive here. Yeah, the one other point I want to make is being involved in this. I've also been told that it's about being inclusive, not being prescriptive, right? So not coming to your community with a prescribed solution, but going there and saying, okay, what can we do to improve this, and really including people in that.
Thanks, Dianne. I love that mindset that you kind of started off with. And I think trust, I think that's, as I imagine all of our panelists would agree, is such a critical ingredient, if you will, in terms of, creating a sense of community. And that actually is a really nice segue into our next question, Dianne. So thank you for that. And Dianne, I'm going to keep with you for this question. And the question is, how do community leaders build trust and establish relationships with individuals or groups who may be hesitant to engage with them?
I think you need to listen. Kim and I think maybe had to learn some of this the hard way, in that, our project had looked like it had ground to a real halt, and we had to kind of redirect it and just really listen to what the community players were saying, right? Like what is it that people really want? And I think one of the things we do need to listen to, and we've changed gears and are really focusing on conversation. So, we had a celebrating conversations and celebrations event and then we're moving towards, focusing on continuing the conversation, but we really need to hear what people have to say, and being, part of the establishment. It's not always easy to hear what that is, but you need to listen, and you need to take every possible opportunity that's presented to engage with people.
Listening and I think being heard, those are two key pieces. And I think that's for our audience is something that is really important, is that you might have an agenda or an idea, but does the community have the same idea? Do they see it being the same problem? It's hard to get people to mobilize on something they're not passionate about. And so listening to find out what they're passionate about is usually that first step. And so thank you, Dianne. Natalie, I want to hear from you. How do community leaders build trust and establish relationships with individuals or groups who may be hesitant to engage with them?
I think this is really interesting because I've been called a keyboard warrior by the mayor. And so it was a bit of an uphill battle, I think, to get to a point where I could interact with everybody. So I did start, just from personal experience, I guess, with good intentions. And I really do value accountability. So I did make a lot of mistakes early on in terms of like reacting before fully having a good understanding of the situations that I was engaging in. And I think that my willingness to own up to those mistakes and work on them, and reaching out to the appropriate people, like just trying to get all the information, listening, like Dianne said, putting myself out there, looking like maybe a fool sometimes, but consistently showing up, I think made a big difference. Like just, oh, there's Nat again. Here's Nat. She's here again. Like nosy community member. is kind of how I introduced myself at a lot of the meetings initially. But I was there to listen. Like, I definitely came in with more to say than more of a willingness to learn. But I, was able to check myself, and I think that helps a lot. And I think you really do have to step back and listen. And then after consistency, so being there consistently is so important, but also the discussion and interactions have to come offline. If they're online, there's too much of a divide. It's too easy. If you're face to face, you just learn so much more and you get so much more from your interactions. And then it's a lot easier to build that relationship of trust between a community leader and your municipality or your local agencies. So I think that's really, really important.
Thanks, Natalie. Yeah, I think learning, that's kind of the word that kind of comes to my mind with that kind of pairs nicely with listening and then learning together. Kim, I'm not going to read the question because it's a long one. I'd love to hear from you.
I think building on that idea of listening and learning is I try to adopt an attitude of curiosity and learning as opposed to feeling defensive. And sometimes I do feel defensive, but I keep my mouth shut until I get back to being curious. And I think acknowledging it, I'm gonna make mistakes. I'm gonna say dumb things. And so what am I gonna do? I just listen, learn, apologize, do better. And I think also being authentic, people can tell if you're just a snake oil salesperson or if you really do have a passion for your community, if you really do care about them, if you really are interested. So be authentic about that and honor the words and commitments you make. That's a little bit like consistency, but when you say you are going to be doing these things or showing up in the community or talking to people, that you keep up with that and treating everyone with dignity and respect. And being truly inclusive and not just adding people to what already exists, but honoring different people's ways of engaging and where it is good for them to be and how they want to engage. So, and it takes time, and I'm definitely with Natalie. Well, almost everything we did was during the pandemic virtually and as our start, and it was just really, really difficult to get things going without being able to meet people and see people. And so we were trying really hard to roll out activities, but we're just taking a step back and saying, no, it's like community at its core is relationships. So let's build those relationships and just have conversation. That's a lot less structured. And I think building that relationship builds that trust just by spending time with people here, and probably not unusual for other places, having some food and having a casual place for people to arrive to have food together is a great way to build trust and establish relationships because they'll see you're real and know you as a person.
Yeah, I think that follow-up piece is so critical. If you're going to say you're going to do something, do it. If you're going to collect information, follow up to say what you're going to do with that information. I think that's that transparency piece that really helps build trust. And Ksenia, I'm curious.
Yes, I love this conversation and I'm learning a lot as well and getting inspired here. But to add a few, I guess, 2 points to what has already been said, in addition to importance of listening and curiosity, I would say one of the critical things that I've learned in my grassroots work in organizing, going at the pace of the people, essentially. You may have ideas and big goals and visions of how things should pan out, but at the same time, yes, as Dianne was saying, you cannot be prescriptive. Just truly taking the time. It will take longer than you think it will. and providing different opportunities, different ways for people to get engaged. So not everyone will become your collaborator and leader overnight. For some, they might need to observe, they may need to learn more about the initiative, or they will be supporters. So there is this spectrum of engagement, if you want to call it, but it will take time. And another thing, again, to jump off what Kim was saying, the relationships, and truly, especially for grassroots community builders and organizers, relationships that are not transactional and extractive, because oftentimes the breakdown of trust happens when, and we've seen it, when public consultations come in, and whenever they need something from the people, so they extract and then they leave. But we are in the community, we live together, and it's very important to build those relationships on human connection and seeing the whole person. It's not the question of, oh, what can you do for me? It's truly seeing the whole humanity and really making sure that the person feels seen and celebrated, and that they belong. And especially in urban context where it's so easy to get lost in the big city, but truly bringing the whole humanity in and building those authentic relationships. So I would say that would be the key.
Beautiful. Yeah, it makes me really think of, collaboration moves at the speed of trust. And I think, there's the caveat that you need to meet people where they're at. And so because of those two pieces, that really, you can't kind of take that blanket approach. You kind of have to meet them where they are, understand what they're interested in, build that relationship. It's just like, how no community is the same, no individual is the same. And so it's really that hyper-focused local approach that is really required in this work. So thank you so much for the conversation. Yeah, I'm also learning so much. And so thank you so much for sharing these stories. Now, I have a specific question for Natalie. And so, Natalie, I'm really curious, what are some potential ways to encourage individuals to maybe take on more of a community leader role in their community?
Yeah, so I think going back to kind of what Ksenia said about transactional extractive relationships, like I think it's important for municipalities and organizations to really showcase the importance of community and community building. Sorry, not just say that it's important, because people can tell, right? And the community already has a lot of distrust with agencies and municipalities already. So that doesn't fly anymore. And it's really important for community members to feel valued and really, hold on one second, and really imperative to the success of the city or the agency. And I also think that words matter. And I've had this discussion with a couple of city councilors here too, that like the word stakeholder gets tossed around a lot, especially in council meetings, and it never refers to the community at large, and really implying that the community is not a stakeholder in a municipal decision can be really, in my opinion, can be really harmful and divisive, right? The same with the term Joe Blow. That one gets thrown around just to mean, random community member. And it's just, it just contributes to that like why bother mentality from a community member. Maybe opening up boards to allow for community members with lived experience instead of relying on education levels or donation values, like of that kind of a thing, just to make them feel more included in the process. For me, becoming a part of this project, a lot of it was my privilege. So I'm a stay-at-home mom. My husband goes to work. I don't have to go to work. So I have that free time to invest in being consistent and to work my schedule around what's available. And I think more people would be involved if there were fewer hurdles to overcome in terms of participating. I think a lot of organizations and municipalities forget that community members are not compensated to be there. I've sat in so many meetings where I'm the only person there who's not being paid to sit in that room. And that can be a little demoralizing, and it can make you feel a little undervalued, if you don't have the mental capacity to convince yourself you still belong to be there, or the ability to, do those things. So making sure things are in accessible buildings, offering transportation, offering food. I think Kim had mentioned that it's so important to have food and get people out. Because I think that that's the bigger hurdle compared to, I think there's a lot of community leaders. I think they just don't have the time to invest or to sacrifice really to give to those things. I also think that we shouldn't overlook municipalities in particular. Don't overlook existing groups, like collaborate with those groups who are already working on those things. Our municipality is working on something right now where Connect Wetaskiwin would have been a perfect connection to facilitate that. So now we have to be the annoying community group and go after them. But if there could be more inclusive that way, that would be nice. And then to piggyback on that, offering resources to those groups. And maybe even like implementing resources to help support members in starting community initiatives instead of just funding existing ones. I read a post on Facebook not too long ago on a news article, and the woman who posted, she had said that she was fascinated with wastewater treatment, and it came out that this was a hobby of hers. She was just absolutely in love with the process and the bacteria and all the things that it took to treat wastewater. And I thought, like, what an asset that would be in a community if the city could invest in a person who loves wastewater treatment, get her the training and have her, then she's connected to place. She's caring about the wastewater for her community. And I think I'd like to see more of that kind of transaction, I guess, where organizations and municipalities are utilizing what exists in their communities to create community leaders. And then, yeah, just being consistent, and don't have an open house once and then complain that nobody comes, especially post-COVID. We have to get used to coming back and interacting with people face to face. And we also need to kind of relearn in some cases that agencies do have our backs, when we need them, because that was a really rough few years and people are just kind of coming back around. So yeah, I think I'd like to see more open houses, more roundtable discussions. That'll really encourage people to come out and get more involved in their community. Sorry, I talk so much. I just
do not apologize. Thank you, Natalie, for sharing your experience. Yeah. And I think you bring up a really important point of like the role of municipalities and institutions. They're not the doers. Their role is to remove barriers, to allow people to do this work. And I think you brought up an important part of equity, realizing that not everybody has the exact same ability, accessibility, or privilege to attend these meetings. And so if you really want to hear from everyone in the community, we have to really, think, put on our equity glasses and think, okay, what can we do to make sure that everyone, regardless of their privilege, of their socioeconomic status, et cetera, can join. And so I really appreciate that. For our next question, this is going to be for Kim and Dianne. And so I'm not too sure who wants to hop in, but feel free. But the question is, and so I guess I should probably, so like the Battlefords is surrounded by a lot of Indigenous nations, and you've talked a little bit about your engagement with these. And so, as you know, many municipalities across Canada, they have Indigenous nations that neighbor them. They have large Indigenous populations. So I'm really curious to know, what did your preparation look like, for your plan to engage with the several Indigenous nations that are within your area?
Thanks, Connor. Dianne and I thought I'd start since I had been with the project since the beginning. And we did approach it intentionally at the beginning to try and figure out ways to be inclusive. There was an early presentation to the Battlefords Tribal Council and different Indigenous groups in town and nearby, but it was more about letting them know about the Tamarack processes. And so it did feel, I think, what we've heard is that it felt like just a colonial drop of prescriptive things, or somewhat like we heard before about just trying to extract information, and it wasn't clear about how it would go. But even with that, we reached out, all of us, to our personal connections and invited people to come to our initial meetings, and they were included in asset mapping as well. Different people from different backgrounds, as Dianne mentioned before, we tried to tap into the different immigrant community, different newcomer communities, as well as the different First Nations. And people did come to the original meetings, but again, it was on Zoom. And then one of the biggest struggles we've had all along is the conflict between taking time to build relationships versus action. We've had very strong people on both ends of that continuum with attention, and culturally that's reflected as well, as our First Nation neighbors culturally appreciate more time to talk using circles, not having a specific amount of talk. If you're sharing your words, that's a gift that you're sharing with people, and there's no rush to do that. Whereas a lot of the people from the other end of the spectrum, from the settler community, and we had people from the business community involved as well, are typically often on that end of the scale as well, where it needs to be efficient, it has to follow the agenda, there needs to be a time, and in the end, people wanted to just cut the meetings down to an hour, to have it very short so people could squeeze it into their time. And it seemed like a lot of people, just by the way the asset mapping had gone, came as part of their work as well, as opposed to citizens. But like Natalie said, some people were there just as interested citizens. So trying to do that on Zoom was a very strange mix as well. But we did, and we were doing it collaboratively. So my position at the beginning was that we are not going to retain any Indigenous involvement if we have an hour for a meeting where nobody can introduce themselves or check in or talk about things, if we just go in order. And that's not really, that's a meeting, that's not community building. But at the community group as a whole decided to stick with that approach for quite a while. But we did lose virtually all of our Indigenous participants, except for one brave soul who kept sticking it out with us, and I just appreciate her so much. But when I was in a very major car accident and stepped away, so that's when Dianne was picked up a lot and stepped in, and just realizing that the process was petering out, and kind of reached that moment where we were like, is this an approach we're going to be able to do or not? And sorry, I'm not implying that had anything to do with Dianne. She has absolutely kept us on track through this all, and I just appreciate her so much for stepping into that. But just the fact that we lost our momentum, we were a very small group meeting for an hour then, and I wasn't able to go in that role anymore either. So lots of things happened at once. But then when we opened back up post-pandemic, we were blessed to have a community member named Bonnie Evans come on. She's a Métis woman who's retiring from her work as a consultant, and she's brokered many relationship deals all across the country and works with many Indigenous Métis communities to come and say, look, you guys are doing this totally colonially, and we need a big rehaul, and let me talk to my people in the community, and let's reboot this, and let's build the process together. We can't just have a process and then invite Indigenous people to join it. They need to be at the roots of developing the process. So and that's what I said coming here today. I'm not an expert, other than I learned from my mistakes. And we've tried and we failed. And now we are finally turning that around to succeeding by learning the hard way that relationships are key, and we need to have circles, and we need to give people a chance to talk. And also, asset-based was kind of at the beginning confusing to people, that you cannot raise those negative issues like racism, and there's no way we can build our bridges without acknowledging and letting people talk about their experience of the community if they are a person who's experienced racism and intergenerational trauma and all the things that go with that. So we've just really revamped our way of approaching it.
I think just to sort of follow up on what Kim said, when we revamped and kind of brought Bonnie on, I think 3 important things happened. Bonnie, I mean, for lack of a kind way to say it, she calls us on it when we're being colonial and white privileged, right? And we need that. We need someone to say, whoa, you're seeing the picture from the wrong angle here. And also is able to say, you know, some of the things we were doing were far too prescriptive and not opening up enough. And it really comes back to relationship. Bonnie brought a relationship with the First Nations that we didn't have. And I think that's probably the biggest advancement at this point for us, is that you know, she can help us develop that relationship now.
Thank you so much for that, Dianne and Kim. I'm just going my colleague Jamie actually shared a resource in the chat, and it's this idea that, you know, a sense of urgency is a white supremacy construct. And so I think, you know, Kim and Dianne, what you are doing is you are decolonizing community engagement. And you're doing that, you're co-creating the process. Yes, and I think that's wonderful. And then so we have our final question of the day, and I want to just prompt our panelists. There are a couple questions within the Q&A panel. If you would like to respond to those via text, you can do that. But our final question is for Ksenia. And so Ksenia, reflecting on the stories from the other panelists, and, you know, given the more rural context compared to where you are in Vancouver, you know, what is important for our audience to consider for the urban context?
Absolutely. Well, it's interesting listening to Dianne and Kim and Natalie. All of these lessons apply, whether it's rural or urban context, the importance of relationships and really shifting our perspective from this colonial way of working and urgency and how change happens, and trying to fit in within the framework and measurement systems, but truly taking the time. And I think in the urban context, the pace of change is just so big, and the voices say of homeowners, they are very strong. So some voices are much stronger than the others, and some voices are left unheard. And I think this is our role, our job as community leaders in the urban context, to ensure that everyone's voices are heard and represented when we are talking about community and how it's changing. And truly shifting the perspective from self-interest and those voices that are advocating for their own interest to thinking about the common good of our community. Because when we live in the community, we all live together, and we need to come up with the common community vision that works for everyone. And I think this perspective shift is also important. And of course, in urban contexts, the diversity, the density, mobility, and just pace of life, not to say that rural context life is simple and easy, but ironically, we live close to each other, but we're more disconnected than ever. And we feel isolated in the cities more than in rural neighborhoods. And again, the importance of coming together and creating those safe spaces for celebration, community, conviviality, joy, they become important. And I think also creating the culture of connection and culture of care in the city, taking that time and building the trust and building those relationships, they become the foundation for any other work that we're planning to do to make a difference and improve the neighborhood and the place we call home. So that would be my advice to community leaders in the cities.
Thank you so much, Ksenia. I think that is a wonderful way to wrap up this webinar conversation. Before we do wrap up, though, we just have one brief announcement, one that I think will be very relevant to many of the people on the call, and is that we are having our annual gathering in the beautiful city of St. Albert, Alberta. And what I think is really exciting about this event is that several of our panelists, if not all of them, will actually be attending this event. And so if you really enjoyed this conversation, I encourage you to take it further. Join us in St. Albert from June 6th to 8th as we, for our conference called Asset-Based Community Development, when community and municipalities meet in the middle. And I think a lot of our conversation today alluded at that in terms of, we're really unpacking what is community leadership, how do we find community leaders, how do we build their capacity. But our municipalities, our institutions, they need to meet us. Where are they going to meet us? That's what we're going to be exploring at our conference. And so I encourage everyone to please to check out the link that's in the chat. It'll be a really great opportunity. Like our team is just so excited for this. We've been thinking about this for so long now. I'm seeing some see you in St. Albert's in the chat. So wonderful. We have some people registered already. But with that, I think what we'll do is we'll wrap it up. And so I just want to thank once again to Natalie, Ksenia, Dianne, and Kim. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar, for sharing your stories, for sharing your wisdom. I think there are so many lessons that we managed to capture in 1 hour. And so kudos to us for doing that, because that is not easy. But I just wanted to say thank you. And just, if you have any final thoughts before we wrap up.
Thank you, Tamarack, for creating these opportunities and including us. And hopefully the next time we have one of these panels, instead of Kim or Dianne, it will be one of our First Nation Indigenous participants who is interested in taking a leadership role with us, so that it is truly a community movement.
And I would say there is a community leader in each of one of us. So what is it something that you care about and willing to take action on, and start today?
And take a chance. Embarrassment doesn't really last that long. Laugh with people and just let them know you're sincere. And people are so generous and forgiving, actually.
True. It's true.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Wishing you a good rest of your day, and we'll see you at our next webinar. Take care.
Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks, Connor.
Thank you.